On July 12, 2011, at 2:40 in the afternoon, a 51-year-old Kansas farmer named Raymond Volker stood beside his Massey Ferguson 8737 combine in a wheat field 6 miles east of Hoxie, watching the feeder house bearing disintegrate in real time. The sound had started 20 minutes earlier, a grinding metallic scrape that built with every rotation until the bearing seized completely and the feeder house chain stopped moving, and Raymond shut down the machine and climbed out into 97-degree heat and looked at a harvest window that was closing and a bearing assembly that had just ended his day. The nearest Massey Ferguson dealer was 87 miles south in Waikini. It was Tuesday afternoon. Parts delivery would be Thursday at the earliest if they had the bearing in stock. If they didn't, Raymond was looking at a week. He had 340 acres of wheat left to cut. The forecast showed rain moving in Friday night. If he didn't finish by Friday, the crop would sit wet through the weekend, and test grades would drop, and what had been a marginal year would become a losing year. Raymond stood in the stubble field looking at the disabled combine and made the calculation every farmer makes when a machine goes down during harvest, which was that he had no good options and several bad ones. And the least bad option involved driving 8 miles to the John Deere dealership on Highway 24 and asking if they would help him get a Massey Ferguson back in the field. He climbed into his pickup and drove to Sheridan Implement. If you understand what it costs a man to walk into a competitor's dealership and ask for help on a machine that competes directly with everything they sell, then you understand why this story matters. Because what happened in the next 48 hours didn't just affect Raymond Volker. It affected 14 other Massey Ferguson operators across 3 counties who heard what Sheridan Implement said when a farmer asked for courtesy and got leverage instead. And it affected Sheridan Implement itself in ways the service manager couldn't have predicted when he made the decision that cost his dealership $340,000 in lost business over the next 19 months. This is what happens when arrogance mistakes a request for help as an opportunity to convert. Now back to Raymond and the bearing that stopped turning. Raymond Volker had been farming 1,840 acres of wheat and milo outside Hoxie since 1987. His father had run international harvester equipment through the 1970s, a 1066 tractor and a 915 combine that were still sitting in the back shed, never sold, just retired. When Case IH absorbed International Harvester in the mid-1980s, Raymond's father stayed loyal for exactly one purchase cycle. He bought a Case IH 61660 combine in 1989, and the transmission failed at 890 hours. The dealer denied the warranty claim, cited improper operation, and charged him $6,200 for the repair. Raymond's father sold the 1660 6 weeks later and bought a Massey Ferguson 8570 from a dealer in Colby. He ran Massey equipment for the rest of his farming career and never explained why to anyone who asked. He just said the 8570 had worked, and that was all the explanation required. When Raymond took over the operation in 1995, he inherited the Massey loyalty without question. He bought a used 8560 combine in 1998, a 6497 tractor in 2002, and in 2008, he traded toward the 8737 combine, a machine with 300 horsepower, a Dyna 6 rotary system, and enough capacity to handle Raymond's wheat and milo acres without requiring a second machine. He'd financed $187,000 over 7 years at 5.9%. The payments were manageable. The combine had performed exactly as specified for 3 seasons. And now, in July 2011, at 1,140 separator hours, the feeder house bearing had failed in the middle of wheat harvest. Raymond had called the Massey dealer in Waikini from the field. They'd confirmed the bearing was in stock. They'd quoted him $840 for the part and $400 for labor if he could get the combine to them. But they couldn't send a service truck until Thursday morning, and Raymond couldn't wait until Thursday. So he drove to Sheridan Implement, the John Deere dealership on Highway 24, 8 miles from his farm. The dealership had been there since 1974. Raymond had never bought anything from them, but he'd driven past it 1,000 times, and he knew the service manager by sight, a man named Colin Brecht who'd been with Sheridan for 11 years. Raymond walked into the service bay at 3:10 in the afternoon. Colin was standing near the parts counter talking to a technician. Raymond waited until the conversation finished, then walked over. "Colin," Raymond said. Colin turned. "Raymond, what brings you in?" "I've got a Massey 8737 down in the field with a feeder house bearing. I need to get it running by tomorrow if possible." Colin looked at him for a moment. "That's a Massey." "It is. We're a John Deere dealership." "I know that. I'm asking if you can help me get the machine back in the field. I'll pay your labor rate. I just need someone who can get the bearing replaced today or tomorrow morning." Colin didn't answer immediately. He looked past Raymond toward the lot, then back. "We don't stock Massey parts. I can get the part from Wakini. I just need the labor." Colin crossed his arms. "Raymond, I appreciate you coming in, but we're a Deere dealership. We service Deere equipment. If you need work done on a Massey, you should take it to a Massey dealer." Raymond kept his voice level. "The nearest Massey dealer is 87 miles away and can't get a truck here until Thursday. I've got 340 acres left to cut and rain coming Friday. I'm not asking you to warranty anything. I'm asking if you'll install a bearing I provide." Colin shook his head slowly. "Here's the thing, Raymond. We could probably help you out. But if we're going to send a tech to your field and spend half a day on a Massey combine, it doesn't make sense for us to just patch it and send you back out there." Raymond felt something shift in the conversation. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if we're already doing the work and you're already down, this might be a good time to talk about upgrading. We've got a 2009 Deere S670 on the lot right now. 480 separator hours, clean machine. We'd give you a fair trade value on the Massey." Raymond stared at him. "You're telling me you won't install a bearing unless I trade my combine?" Colin held up his hands. "I'm not saying we won't help you. I'm saying it doesn't make business sense for us to spend resources fixing a competitor's machine when we could be having a conversation about getting you into something that we can actually support long term." Raymond didn't raise his voice. He just said, "So that's a no." Colin shrugged. "That's a, let's talk about your options." Raymond turned and walked out of the service bay, climbed into his pickup, and drove home. He didn't speed. He didn't slam the door. He just drove the 8 miles back to his farm with the kind of cold clarity that comes when a man realizes he's been given a choice he never should have been offered. Raymond called the Massey dealer in Wakini at 4:15 and told them he'd drive down that evening to pick up the bearing himself. They said they'd have it ready. He ate dinner with his wife, Carol, at 5:30. She asked what had happened at the Deere dealership. Raymond told her exactly what Colin Brecht had said. Carol set her fork down. "They wouldn't help unless you traded?" That's what he said. "After 30 years of you farming Massey, they thought they could leverage a breakdown into a sale?" Raymond nodded. Carol looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to drive to Wakini, pick up the bearing, install it myself tonight, and finish harvest. And after that..." Raymond didn't answer right away. He looked out the kitchen window at the equipment shed, where the Massey 8737 should have been sitting if it weren't still in the field with a failed bearing. Then he said, "After that, I'm going to make a phone call." Carol knew what that meant. Raymond drove to Wakini that evening. He picked up the bearing at 7:40 p.m. The parts manager at the Massey dealership asked what had happened. Raymond told him. The parts manager shook his head. "Sheridan tried to flip a breakdown into a trade? That's what happened. You're the third person this month who's told me something like that." Raymond looked at him. "Who were the other two?" The parts manager gave him 2 names. Both were Massey operators. Both farmed within 40 miles of Hoxie. Raymond drove home with the bearing and a piece of information that was going to matter more than either of them knew. He installed the bearing that night in the field under work lights powered by his pickup. The job took 4 hours. The bearing seated correctly. The feeder house chain tensioned properly. Raymond started the combine at 1:20 in the morning and let it run for 10 minutes. No grinding, no vibration. He shut it down, drove home, slept 3 hours, and was back in the field by 6 a.m. He finished cutting the remaining 340 acres by Thursday afternoon. The rain came Friday night as forecasted. Raymond had beaten it by 18 hours. He unloaded the last of the wheat at the elevator on Saturday morning. The grain tested 12.8% moisture, no grade loss. The year stayed marginal, but it didn't become a loss. Raymond drove home, parked the combine, and walked into his office. He picked up the phone and called a man named Terry Mosteller, who farmed 2,100 acres northwest of Grainfield. Terry ran Massey equipment. He'd been buying from the Wakini dealer for 16 years. Raymond and Terry had known each other since high school. They weren't close friends, but they were the kind of acquaintances who trusted each other's word and didn't waste time on small talk. "Terry," Raymond said when the call connected. "It's Raymond Volker." "Raymond, what's going on?" "I had a situation this week I think you should know about." Raymond told him what happened. The bearing failure, the drive to Sheridan Implement, Colin Brecht's refusal to help unless Raymond agreed to discuss trading the Massey toward a Deere combine. Terry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They tried to leverage you into a trade?" "That's exactly what happened. And you're calling me because the parts manager at Wakini said you had a similar experience." Terry exhaled. "I didn't have a breakdown. I just needed a hydraulic hose made. Sheridan's got a hose shop. The Massey dealer doesn't. I stopped in 3 weeks ago and asked if they'd make me a hose. Colin told me they could, but it would be easier if I just brought my tractor in and let them look at their trade-in options while I was there." Raymond said, "What did you do?" "I drove to Colby and had the hose made there. Took an extra 40 minutes, but I wasn't going to sit through a sales pitch for asking a favor." Raymond said, "Did you tell anyone?" "I told 2 people, both Massey operators." "Who?" Terry gave him the names. Raymond wrote them down. Then Terry said, "What are you thinking?" Raymond said, "I'm thinking I want to know how many other people Sheridan's done this to." Over the next 2 weeks, Raymond made 11 phone calls. He called the 2 names Terry had given him. Both confirmed similar experiences at Sheridan Implement. One had asked for a fuel filter cross-reference. The other had asked if Sheridan could diagnose an electrical issue on a Massey tractor. In both cases, Colin Brecht had turned the request into a trade conversation. Raymond asked each of them if they'd told anyone. They had. Raymond got those names. By the end of the second week, Raymond had identified 14 Massey Ferguson operators across Sheridan, Thomas, and Gove counties who had gone to Sheridan Implement for parts, service, or technical help in the past 8 months and had been met with the same response. "We can help, but let's talk about getting you into a Deere." None of them had filed complaints. None of them had posted anything online. They just quietly stopped going to Sheridan and started driving farther for parts and service from dealers who didn't treat a request for help as a sales opportunity. But none of them had coordinated. None of them knew the others had experienced the same thing. Raymond realized he was looking at a pattern that Sheridan Implement didn't know existed. On August 3rd, 2011, Raymond called a meeting. He didn't call it a boycott. He didn't call it a protest. He just called 13 farmers and asked if they'd be willing to meet at the grain elevator in Hoxie on Saturday morning to discuss something that affected all of them. All 13 said yes. They met on August 6th at 7 a.m. in the grain elevator's conference room. Raymond had brought coffee. The 14 men sat around a table that was meant for 8. Raymond started by asking each of them to describe what had happened when they'd gone to Sheridan Implement for help. The stories were nearly identical. A farmer needed a part, a service, or a diagnostic. Sheridan had the capability. Colin Brecht said they could help, but framed the help as conditional on the farmer being willing to discuss trading their Massey equipment toward John Deere. No one had been directly refused service, but the message had been clear. If we're doing work for you, we expect you to consider becoming a customer. When the last story finished, Raymond said, "So here's what I'm proposing. We stop giving Sheridan Implement our business. No parts, no service, no courtesy requests. If we need something they have, we drive to Colby or Wakini or Hill City. We don't make a scene. We don't confront Colin. We just stop going in." One of the farmers, a man named Ed Pullman, said, "What if they ask why?" Raymond said, We tell them the truth. They treated a request for help as a sales opportunity, and we're not interested in doing business with a dealership that operates that way. Another farmer, Vernon Schott, said, "What about the rest of the county? People who aren't here?" Raymond said, "We don't recruit them. We don't campaign. If someone asks us why we're driving past Sheridan to get parts, we tell them what happened. But we're not organizing anything. We're just making a personal decision about where we spend our money." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Terry Mosler said, "I'm in." One by one, the others agreed. By 7:45 a.m., all 14 farmers had committed to the same quiet decision. They would stop doing business with Sheridan Implement. No petition. No public announcement. Just 14 men who had been treated like leverage instead of customers, choosing to take their business elsewhere. Colin Breck noticed the change in October. Massey Ferguson operators had never been Sheridan's primary customer base, but they'd been a steady secondary revenue stream. Part sales, hydraulic hose work, occasional diagnostic labor, it added up to $40,000 to $60,000 a year. By mid-October 2011, that revenue had dropped to nearly zero. Colin mentioned it to the parts manager. The parts manager said he'd noticed the same thing. Massey guys just weren't coming in anymore. Colin assumed it was coincidence. Harvest was over. Farmers were holding off on maintenance until winter. But by December, the pattern was undeniable. Raymond Volker hadn't been in since July. Terry Mosteller hadn't been in since June. Ed Pullman, Vernon Schott, Carl Diebert, none of them had set foot in the dealership since summer. Colin asked the sales manager if he knew what was going on. The sales manager said, "I heard something at the co-op last week." "What?" "Somebody said Raymond Volker's been telling people we wouldn't help him with a combine repair unless he agreed to trade." Colin frowned. "That's not what happened." "What did happen?" Colin explained. Raymond had come in with a Massey combine issue. Colin had offered to help, but suggested it made more sense to have a trade conversation if Sheridan was going to invest labor in a competitor's machine. The sales manager looked at him. "Colin, how did you think Raymond was going to take that?" "I thought he'd see it as a reasonable business proposition." "You thought a farmer with a broken machine in the middle of harvest was going to see a trade pitch as reasonable?" Colin didn't answer. The sales manager said, "How many other people have you done that to?" Colin said, "I don't know, a few." "How many is a few?" Colin thought about it. "Maybe 10 or 12 over the past year." The sales manager stared at him. 10 or 12 Massey operators? Yeah. And how many of them are still coming in? Colin realized he didn't know. The sales manager said, "I'm going to pull the customer activity report." He came back 20 minutes later with a printout showing every Massey Ferguson operator who had done business with Sheridan Implement in 2010 compared to 2011. The 2010 list had 19 names. The 2011 list had 5. The sales manager set the report on Colin's desk. "You lost 14 customers." Colin looked at the numbers. "They're not customers. They run Massey. They were never going to buy from us." "They were parts and service customers, Colin. That's $50,000 a year in margin we just lost because you tried to turn every service request into a trade negotiation." Colin said, "I was trying to build our customer base." The sales manager said, "You cost us our customer base." In January 2012, Sheridan Implement's owner, a man named Dale Sheridan, called Colin into his office. Dale had reviewed the year-end financials. Parts and service revenue was down 11% compared to 2010. The decline was concentrated in a specific category, non-Deere equipment service. Dale asked Colin to explain it. Colin told him about the Massey operators, about the trade conversations, about the logic of not investing labor in competitor equipment without exploring conversion opportunities. Dale listened without interrupting. When Colin finished, Dale said, "How much did we make from those trade conversations?" Colin said, "We didn't close any of them." "How much did we lose in parts and service revenue from the customers who stopped coming in?" Colin didn't answer. Dale pulled up the report. "We lost $53,000 in parts and service margin in 2011 compared to 2010. Almost all of it from Massey operators who used to buy hoses, filters, bearings, and diagnostic work from us." He looked at Colin. "You tried to convert 14 customers and lost all 14. "What was your plan if that happened?" Colin said. "I didn't think they'd all leave." Dale said, "They didn't leave, Colin. You pushed them out." Colin started to respond, but Dale held up his hand. "I'm not firing you, but I am changing the policy. From now on, if a farmer walks in here asking for help, any farmer, any brand, we help them. No sales pitch, no trade conversation unless they bring it up. We're a service business first. If we do that well, the sales follow. If we do it the way you've been doing it, we lose both." Colin nodded. Dale said, "Now go call Raymond Volker and apologize." Colin called Raymond on January 18th, 2012. Raymond answered on the third ring. "Raymond, it's Colin Brecht from Sheridan Implement." There was a pause. Then Raymond said, "What can I do for you, Colin?" "I'm calling to apologize for how I handled your situation last July. You came in asking for help, and I turned it into a sales conversation. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Raymond didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "I appreciate the call, Colin. I'd like to earn your business back." Raymond said, "Colin, I'm not upset, but I'm also not coming back. You made it clear that helping me wasn't worth your time unless I was willing to buy from you. I understand that's a business decision. This is mine." Colin said, "If there's anything I can do." Raymond said, "There's nothing to do. You made your decision in July. I made mine in August. We're both living with them." And Raymond hung up. Colin sat at his desk for a long time after that call. Then he called the other 13 names on the list. 3 of them didn't answer. 4 of them listened to his apology and thanked him politely and said they weren't interested in returning. 6 of them had the same response Raymond had. "You made your choice. I made mine." None of them came back. By the end of 2012, Sheridan Implement's parts and service revenue had dropped 19% compared to 2010. The lost Massey operators weren't the only cause, but they were a significant part of it. More importantly, the story had spread. Farmers across 3 counties knew that Sheridan Implement had tried to leverage breakdowns into sales. And while most of them didn't run Massey equipment, they understood the principle. A dealership that treats a request for help as a conversion opportunity is not a dealership you trust when something goes wrong. In 2013, 2 John Deere operators who had been Sheridan customers for over a decade quietly switched to a competing Deere dealer in Oakley. When asked why, both gave the same answer: "I heard some things about how they treat people." Dale Sheridan tried to rebuild. He brought in a new service manager in 2014. He started offering no-questions-asked parts sales for any brand. He personally reached out to several of the farmers who had left. None of them came back. In 2016, Sheridan Implement closed its Hoxie location. The building was sold to an auto repair shop. The nearest John Deere dealer is now 34 miles away in Oakley. Dale Sheridan retired in 2018. Colin Brecht left the industry in 2015. No one knows where he is now. Raymond Volker still farms 1,840 acres outside Hoxie. He's 64 years old now. His son Michael farms with him. The Massey Ferguson 8737 combine is still running. It has 4,100 separator hours on it. Raymond rebuilt the feeder house completely in 2019. The bearing he installed himself in July 2011 lasted until 2018, 7 seasons without failure. In 2020, Michael asked his father if they should look at trading the 8737 toward a newer machine. Raymond said no. Michael asked why. Raymond didn't explain the full story. He just said, "That machine's earned the right to stay." Michael didn't push. But a week later, Michael asked his mother why his father had such loyalty to a 13-year-old combine. Carol told him about July 2011, about the bearing failure, about Sheridan Implement, about Colin Brecht's refusal to help unless Raymond agreed to discuss a trade. Michael had been 19 in 2011. He'd known the combine had broken down during harvest, but he'd never understood what had happened after that. Now he did. In 2022, a farm equipment journalist, writing a story about dealer relationships, contacted Raymond and asked if he'd be willing to talk about why independent operators stay loyal to specific brands. Raymond said, "It's not about the brand. It's about who treats you like a customer when you're not buying anything." The journalist asked if he had an example. Raymond told him about July 2011. The journalist asked if Raymond had ever regretted not taking Sheridan's trade offer. Raymond said, "I didn't have a trade offer. I had a condition, and I don't do business with people who put conditions on help." The journalist asked if Raymond would ever consider buying from a John Deere dealer again. Raymond said, "If I found one that acted like Dale Sheridan did after Colin left, maybe. But I haven't found one yet." Of the 14 farmers who stopped doing business with Sheridan Implement in August 2011, 11 are still farming. All 11 still run Massey Ferguson equipment. All 11 still buy parts and service from the dealer in Waikini, even though it's 87 miles away. When asked why they're willing to drive that far, their answers are nearly identical. Because they helped when I needed it, and they didn't make it conditional. Terry Mostella retired in 2021. His son took over the farm and still runs Massey. When asked if he'd ever consider switching to John Deere, the son said, "I never asked my father why he stayed with Massey, but I know he had a reason. That's good enough for me." Ed Pullman died in 2019. His farm was sold to a neighbor who runs a mixed fleet, Massey, Case IH, and New Holland. Vernon Schott still farms. He bought a new Massey Ferguson 8740S combine in 2023. When the salesman asked why he stayed loyal to Massey, Vernon said, "Because nobody ever tried to sell me one when I just needed a bearing." There's a phrase that gets used in rural communities when a business mistakes desperation for opportunity. They tried to sell when they should have just helped. Sheridan Implement tried to convert 14 service requests into 14 sales opportunities. They converted 0. They lost 14 customers, $53,000 in annual parts and service revenue, and the trust of 3 counties. All because Colin Brecht believed that helping a farmer with a Massey Ferguson breakdown wasn't worth doing unless that farmer was willing to become a John Deere customer. He was wrong, because in farming communities, help is the sale. And if you can't understand that, you won't be in business long enough to learn it. Raymond Volker is 64 years old now. He still runs that Massey Ferguson 8737. And he still remembers July 12, 2011, when he walked into a dealership asking for a bearing and walked out with a decision that has shaped every equipment purchase he's made since. Not because he's loyal to Massey Ferguson, because Massey Ferguson dealers were loyal to him when it mattered, and Colin Brecht wasn't.